Well, a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, that's U.S. Supreme Court, not Indiana Supreme Court, heard arguments over tariffs and whether the president had the authority to unilaterally declare tariffs or whether that was in the job of Congress. And so join us on the newsline, our good friend Josh Claybourn, a good lawyer down in southwestern Indiana in the Evansville area, who was actually there and actually wrote an amicus brief in favor of, or rather opposing what the president wanted to do. So Josh, my friend, how's it going? How's life down in southern Indiana these days?
Good, although not as exciting as the State House right now.
Oh, yeah, so no swatting, no new maps, no being called a gossip girl by the lieutenant governor. So
not yet, anyway. So we're good so far.
All right, so let's sort of set this up. Explain your involvement in this tariff debate.
Well, I'm very passionate about the Constitution's protections for the separate powers. I think that's what makes us America, because it helps keep each branch in check from getting too powerful, frankly, because when one branch becomes too powerful, you effectively end up with an elected king or an elected speaker of the House, et cetera. And so the whole purpose of the American design is separation of powers. Looking at tyranny throughout history, the founders understood that was one of the best ways to check it. And so when that starts to get out of whack, I get very concerned. I got concerned about it certainly under Obama and Biden, who each took quite a bit of, I think, unjustified and illegal steps in the executive branch. And this has been an ongoing problem for decades, and President Trump is continuing that trend. One of the challenges or concerns I had was that the way Trump stepped over those separation of power lines was massive when it comes to trade. It's one guy who decided, hey, I can institute a global tariff at whatever level I want, for whatever amount I want, and for any reason I want, at any time. And that's the basis of the administration's argument. It's completely illegal and antithetical to the Constitution.
Okay, so help us out here. So what exactly did the president do?
Well, the president executes the laws. Congress is charged with making the laws. Of course, they have to be signed and approved by the president, and the president executes them. And so here the president is saying that there is a law from the mid-'70s, IEPA, that allows him to implement these sweeping tariffs. It doesn't. Nowhere in that law is the word tariff or tax or duty or import, which are all words that Congress very clearly uses when it wants to give the president that power, and it's not there. So first we have a statutory problem. But even if Congress did try to do that in the statute, and it didn't, but let's say hypothetically it did, I'd argue that's an unconstitutional delegation of power. It wasn't clear enough, and it's too major of an issue for Congress to just simply delegate.
Now, a lot of folks will say that, hey, the president has the authority. He's doing this to get fair trade, and America's been taken advantage of for so long by all these other countries. So the president has to have the ability to do this.
Well, okay, then Congress needs to pass a law allowing that, right? I mean, it's not just one person who decides they need it, and so therefore we can ignore the Constitution or ignore the laws, right? There's a process in place, because more than likely Congress is going to say, okay, maybe in these scenarios we need to expand the tariff powers even more, but we're going to have guardrails in place. And that's, by the way, where the law is right now. I mean, there are many, many provisions that allow the president to implement a tariff, but they have checks and balances. They require him to come to Congress or to justify what the reason is, or there are limits as to the percentage of the tariff and the length of the tariff, right? I mean, there are different guardrails in place for different scenarios. So that's not anywhere in the law to go beyond that.
Our guest on the program today is our good friend Josh Claybourn. Josh is an attorney down in southwestern Indiana, the Evansville area. We've known each other for more than 20 years now. We both had a lot more hair and a lot less stomach. So we're talking about the president and his desire to put tariffs on Europe and on world goods coming into the United States. But Josh has made an argument, and an argument that's actually before the Supreme Court right now, basically saying that, hey, the president does not have the authority to do this. He may want to do it, and Congress can give him the authority to do it, but he doesn't have it right now. Josh, obviously, you were there at the Supreme Court. How did the Supreme Court take both the arguments that your side made and the arguments that the president's side made?
Well, it's hard to really predict based on the oral arguments alone, but you could try. And if we're going to, I'd say that the tariffs are likely to be struck down as either beyond what the statute allows or unconstitutional, one or the other. A majority of the justices were giving far more challenging questions to the Department of Justice, the Solicitor General, and Trump's administration. So, and moreover, I mean, it's in keeping with their judicial philosophy. Conservatives have long preached the importance of the separation of powers, the importance for anything the executive does to be clearly authorized by statute and also by law. I mean, look, Article 1 of the Constitution makes it very clear that Congress is the one who has the power to implement duties and imports and tariffs and taxing, and also has the authority to regulate interstate commerce. So this is very clearly an Article 1 congressional power, and if they're going to delegate it, they have to be very clear about that delegation, which didn't happen here. And these justices have made that point again and again in prior cases. So to rule differently, to rule for the administration here, would be almost a 180 for most of them on terms of what they've done, and not a good sign, because I think that'd be a clear signal. They're doing it for political purposes and not legal ones. But call me naive, call me optimistic, but I believe these justices do believe in the Constitution, do believe in the law, and they're going to interpret it consistent with their prior rulings.
And you're absolutely right. We should first of all, if I could predict what a judge was going to do, what a court was going to do, I wouldn't have to sue people for defamation. I'd be in Vegas right now getting rich with my precognitive abilities. However, I do think that by the questions and the tone and the tenor and sort of the nonverbal communications that are out there when a judge asks a question, you can kind of sort of get a feel for where they're leaning, or at least what they're looking at.
Right. And I was there. I mean, I was in the third row, and I was real close. I could get a lot of those sort of nonverbal cues, and I felt like the justices were far more skeptical of the Department of Justice. Now, I don't think that it could be unanimous, but probably not. I do think there may be one or two, probably three at most, that would vote for the administration, but I think there's certainly a healthy majority that are going to vote to overturn them.
What was the demeanor of Justices Thomas and Alito?
Well, Thomas is very famous for not asking very many questions at the oral argument, and that was consistent here. He did ask a couple. They were pretty benign, and he effectively offered the same questions to both sides. So he's a little tougher to read. But I did feel like Alito was asking questions that were more supportive of the administration and more challenging to the plaintiffs. Now, that wasn't uniform. I mean, he asked some challenging questions to the administration and whatnot. But I do think if there's a justice most likely to vote for Trump on these tariff matters, it's going to be Alito.
Our guest on the program today is Joshua Claybourn. Josh is an attorney down in southwestern Indiana in the Evansville area. We've known each other for 20 years. He was actually at the Supreme Court hearing earlier this month, I want to say November 5th, November 6th, when the Supreme Court heard arguments over the president's ability to sort of unilaterally impose tariffs, and Josh was co-author of what's called an amicus brief that was against the president's power and authority. Obviously, Josh, like I said, you can never tell what a court's going to do based on the questions that they ask. However, I want to say that you can't, because sometimes a judge will ask a challenging question, not because they disagree with an individual, because they want I want to make sure that if I'm going to rule in your favor, I want it to be airtight.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly right. So it can be difficult to predict, like we said. But I still, if you're going to make me bet money, I'm going to bet on the plaintiffs that are challenging the tariffs here.
So let's say let's go really down the speculative road, and let's say the court does rule in favor, of the people who are against the president's unilateral authority to implement tariffs. what happens to the tariffs that have already been implemented? Who gets that money back? And do I get a refund at the comic book store because the paper that they had to import from Canada increased my prices?
Yeah, I mean that's the literally $500 billion question. The default, the standard rule there is that tariffs that were collected illegally have to be returned. But here, who paid the tariffs, right? I mean, the retailer is the one that typically pays the government themselves. But as you've noted, they often pass that on to the consumer, although that's not always 100%. A lot of times it's sort of some percentage they're going to pass on to you, some percentage they may take lower profits. Sometimes they may, have other fees or other ways to take care of that. So tracking the tariff, the refund flow is going to be very, very challenging. And I think that's going to be a messy situation that I doubt the Supreme Court themselves will want to deal with. They may punt that down to the lower courts, but I can also see, based on my conversations with some of the members of Congress about this, that I could see some federal legislation trying to dictate how that's handled as well.
Yeah, because I could easily, my friend, see a situation where if the Supreme Court says, hey, the tariffs are unconstitutional, we're going to reverse this decision back to lower courts. We're going to reverse it and remand. Okay, you guys figure it out. We'll just say, hey, they're unconstitutional, and we'll just leave it at that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it could be a situation where, there's talks of another effectively tariff check being cut to the citizens. I mean, that's a whole different can of worms, but I could see, for instance, Congress just saying, well, we've collected X dollars in tariff revenue. Let's just refund that to the citizens based on the most simple, fair way we can. I'm not sure. I mean, again, typically this is a little bit more straightforward because the amount of illegally collected tariffs is smaller, it's more discrete, it's more focused, it's easier to pinpoint who's owed the refund. This situation is something that they've never had to confront before. So we're in uncharted waters.
Well, we're in uncharted waters with the Trump administration. I'm shocked. Next thing you tell me, my friend, there's gambling going on here. Go ahead.
No, and obviously, the Supreme Court is grappling with case after case that, like we said, is just unprecedented, and this is the latest. But I do think long term, this is, in my opinion, the most significant. I mean, this is really what it's all about, right? We're testing separation of powers in a very, very big way, with massive consequences for generations in terms of presidential power and the balance of that power between the president and Congress.
As I jokingly tell my students, this is the broccoli and Brussels sprouts of governing. I mean, obviously, you have some of the bigger issues that are out there, but that's more the dessert. This actually goes to hardcore brass tacks. It hits you in the pocketbook because with inflation, and by the way, inflation is in part because of tariffs and increased prices. This has some major consequences, not only in the United States, but also globally.
Right. That's exactly right. I totally agree.
Josh Claybourn with us for a few minutes on the program today. Josh is an attorney down in southwestern Indiana. He was actually at the Supreme Court earlier this month when the Supreme Court heard arguments over the president and his ability to throw in tariffs. So, Josh, I got to ask you, because of your involvement in this issue, how often have you been called a rhino?
Here's the thing. I mean, I'm a small government, libertarian-minded conservative. I don't know. So often it's a debate over definitions, right? I mean, what does conservative mean now? What does Republican mean now? And so it's difficult to keep up with. I just know that my conservative/libertarian approach to government hasn't changed. I've been the same, pretty consistent on that. And I expect that to continue. If the parties change or somebody else changes their definition of those words, I might have to adopt something different. But I will say it's interesting that more often than not, the people that I see flinging around the word rhino are people that either support or are themselves someone who was a Democrat pretty consistently within the last 20 years. But I, on the other hand, have been a consistent Republican my whole life. So the hypocrisy is pretty thick with a lot of people who throw that term around, I find.
Well, if you ever want me to do it, I'll create a meme. I'll make you like the rhino, like I did on my Facebook page. My joke is like I may be a rhino, yeah, but the last place you want to be is in front of a charging rhino because they really got that really big horn, and it's not a unicorn.
Right.
Josh Claybourn with us for a few more minutes. Josh, let's change gears just a little bit. Obviously, we had some interesting issues going on here in Indiana. We had swatting done against State Senator Greg. Actually, 3 swatting incidents so far with state lawmakers. We've had the lieutenant governor, the governor, the whole 9 yards. How are folks taking out the redistricting issue? How are folks taking all that down in southwestern Indiana?
We obviously have people all over the chart just like you do, but it's been interesting that for quite a while, the state senators down here, particularly anyway, Posey, Vanderburgh, Warwick senators, which are Senators Becker and Tomes, have both been opposed to it. Now, I will say, sort of at the last minute, after quite a bit of pressure, it seems like Tomes has indicated a willingness to flip here eventually, and that he'll ultimately vote for redistricting. But I haven't seen, beyond a handful of outspoken people, a big groundswell of support for this. It seems to track the polling data that I've seen throughout the rest of the state that most folks feel like this is outside pressure and not something Indiana itself has asked for. And from a political standpoint, I am a little intrigued. I mean, we have it set up now where you have solidly Republican congressional districts, and the only way to try and shoot for 9-0 is to make those existing congressional districts far less Republican. And I'm sure there are some Democrat challengers who may be on their face standing with their Democrats opposing this, but deep down may be excited at the prospect of making the rest of the Republican districts more competitive. So to me, it strikes me as something of be careful what you wish for. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Obama won Indiana. And so while we are definitely a Republican state, I think tinkering with redistricting could easily backfire.
And by the way, too, next year is an election year, and there is no gubernatorial race. There's no U.S. Senate race. There's no U.S. Senate, no governor, no presidential, which means the top of the ticket now goes down to the Secretary of State. And on the one hand, you have Bo Bai, who's right out of central casting, and on the other side, you have Diego Morales at the top of your ticket being the standard bearer. Good luck with that,
right,
guys.
Right. And, from a legal standpoint, you and I have talked about this, Abdul, that it's interesting that the Trump administration is suing California because it's opposing the mid-decade redistricting, and it's suing California on the basis that it's racist to do so. And here in Indiana, Republicans are redistricting at Trump's behest to remove what happens to be the only black congressman in the state. Now, I do not think, for the record, that racism is driving this, but it does seem like a inconsistent argument that Trump's DOJ is going to have to wrestle with when it's challenging California redistricting while simultaneously pushing other states to do the same thing.
My friend, I have an old saying, it's not what it is, it's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. Well, our guest on the program today has been a good friend, Joshua Claybourn. Josh is an attorney down in southwestern Indiana, down in the Evansville area. We've known each other for 20-something odd years. So, Josh, my friend, thank you very much for being with us. Next time I'm down the neck of the woods, after I hit the casino, we'll grab a cigar and talk about gossip and rumor and blatant innuendo.
Absolutely.